Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. Today I wanted to make an advanced flipping guide. I made one of these like 2 years ago. It was in the first couple videos I ever made. So I thought I would make an updated version of it. If you are new to flipping, I did release a beginner flipping guide pretty recently, which I'll leave a link in the description for that. I would go watch that first before you watch this video because it may not make that much sense. Today we're going to be talking about a bunch of different types of flips that you can do, how to determine the margins for those items, as well as determining ROIs and when you should be flipping certain items. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed the video and let's get started. Okay, so to begin with here, I want to talk about a few different things that have changed since I last made that guide. Now the first and most important thing that is different now is that we know every single buying limit in the game right now because a moderator did release a spreadsheet of every single buying limit at this time. So that's pretty much every single item because there has not been any new items released since then. I don't think so. So if you don't know, there's actually a limit on the Ground Exchange that prevents you from buying more than a certain amount of items every 4 hours. Now this is just a limit on the buying of that item. You can sell as many items as you can potentially sell. And these limits are all individual for each different item. So for example, there is a limit of 2,000 on the Grimy Renarweed. Once you hit that limit, you can go ahead and flip another item. You can flip another herb even, but you have to wait 4 hours until you can flip Renar again. So there's a few different ways to look at this information. The easiest way is to go on to the Oldschool Runescape wiki. So I just picked a random item like the blue feather. Like no one would normally know this buying limit, but if we scroll down, you can see here down at the bottom that the buying limit's actually 8,000. Now this will work for every single tradable item in the game. So if we think of like, let's see, monkey nuts. Monkey nuts have a buying limit of 6,000, not that bad. Leather chaps have a buying limit of 125. Now the alternative method for this is GE Tracker, which is a sponsor of mine. There will be a link in the description if you're interested in that. However, from popular request, I'm not going to be featuring it too much in this video. I'm not trying to make this guide without the need of some third-party clients, but it will be in here a little bit. But anyway, you can see here at the side that all of the GE buying limits are displayed pretty conveniently. So in my last flipping video, I talked a little bit about margins and how to determine them. Now knowing an item's margin is very important, but you kind of need to have some relative information here. Two items could have the exact same margin, however one item will be much better than the other just because of some other factors. The biggest factors being price. If an item is way more expensive and you're still getting the same margin, then you're much better off going with a cheaper item. And the second factor is the selling volume. If two items have the same margin and one sells a lot more frequently, you're almost always better off going with that item. So let's go ahead and just find two items here and let's see if we can find some with kind of reasonably close buying limits. So to solve the dilemma with the first one, the best way to counter that is by looking up the item's ROI or return on investment. So to determine the ROI, let's go just do an item here. So let's go with the green dragon hide. So first up, like always, we need to determine the margin. That's going to be important for a lot of this. So we're just going to quickly buy it and sell back the green dragon hide. We're going to go over here to our history and let's have a look. So first up, let's do the margin calculation, which is really easy. It's just going to be the higher price minus the lower price. So 15.35 minus 15.25 is going to be 10. The formula for determining your ROI is going to be margin divided by your buy price. For this example here, it's going to be 15.35 minus 15.25 in brackets divided by 15.25. Now I understand in your price history thing it's going to say sold and bought, but it's actually going to be the opposite because the price that you instantly sold it is actually the price you want to buy it at, and the price that you instantly bought it at is actually the price you're going to be selling it at. It's just some terminology. It kind of just depends what works for you, but I just determine it like that. And then you also want to multiply it by 100 to get a percentage. So in this case here, I'm getting 0.65% of my investment back, which is not that great. I would definitely try to shoot for higher than that. Okay, so now let's have a look at another item here. Let's try the teak log. Okay, so the margin on the teak log is actually 8. So if you're just looking at this in a one-dimensional view, you would determine that the green dragon hide is better, but really it's not. Even though it has a margin of 2 more than the teak log is going to have a much higher ROI just because of how much cheaper it is. So in this case, we're going to do 305 minus 293, which will give us 8, divided by 293, and times 100 is going to give us about 4% or 4.1%. So this item is drastically better than the other one, and hence you should always go with the teak log in this scenario. Now, as I said earlier, there is one other factor, and that is the buying quantity or the selling quantity. So next up here, we want to determine what the buying or selling quantities are per hour. This is important because it's going to tell you in general how quickly and at what quantity your items will come through at. So let's have a look at the teak log right now. We'll just search that up in the Oldschool Runescape website directly. Okay, so here's the information for the teak log. Down here we have the amount traded. So this is going to be the amount traded per day. So that's 1,042,000 traded every single day. So that's quite a lot. Now the other option is GE Tracker, which can break it down to the hour, which is pretty nice, but really not necessary for an item of this quantity. And next up here, let's have a look at the green dragonhide. So the green dragonhide trades about 1.7 million every day. So really it's going to be irrelevant at that point because you're going to hit the buying limit before this would ever be a factor. Now where this might be a factor is if you're comparing two different types of items that aren't really in the same category. So let's say the dragon scimitar against the teak logs. Now the dragon scimitars trade about 12,000 a day. So if you compare the potential amount of items you can buy for the dragon scimitar along with its buying limit and compare it to the teak logs, there's going to be a drastic difference there. So hopefully that made sense. Now next up here I wanted to talk about the different variety of flips there are. So I kind of break these down into different categories. There's generally high volume flips, which are flips like green dragonhide, teak logs, anything that's like a consumable item that you would stack up thousands of, I would consider to be a high volume flip. And there's high margin flips, which are going to be rarer items or generally items with lower buying limits. If an item has a buying limit of like 100 or less, I would consider it a high margin item. Now within each of those two categories, I would break them down further. For high volume flips, there's going to be the in-market items, which are going to be like the top 100 most traded items in the game. And then there's going to be the slower options for high volume flips, which might be lesser known items that actually have a high buy-in limit, like stuff like Ultra Compost, White Berries, Unfinished Potions, or even like more random items. Like I got a really good flip on Giant Seaweed a while ago. Now in the high margin category, I would just break it down into two separate subcategories as well. There are the in-market high margin flips. That'll be stuff like Abyssal Whips, Berserker Rings, Barrow Sets, stuff like that where they are PVM items that people use constantly. Really, they're just getting gated by their buying limits at that point. They would probably trade a lot more, but they have pretty low buying limits. For example, if we have a look at the Duroc armor set, they actually trade like 1,000 to 2,000 every day. But because they only have a limit of 8, they wouldn't really be considered a high volume item. Then you're going to have these slower high margin items, and those are going to be rare items that really do not trade that much. And these are where people that make a lot of money because they can have an extremely high margin like 1 million, 2 million, 3 million GP for a very minimal amount of work, but this is a lot riskier. Okay, so let's go through all these categories and I'll just show you an easy technique for finding the margin and when you should maybe do this. Okay, let's start off with the easiest one, which is going to be the in-market high volume flips. This one is really simple. Now, the easiest way to find these items are just to come over here to the RuneScape Exchange website and go click on most traded. This will give you the top 100 most traded items in the game, which will be very effective. Now keep in mind you want to ignore the extremely cheap items like fire runes, feathers, pure essence, and air runes. Because they are so cheap, like 4 or 5 GP, you are not going to be able to flip these very effectively. However, moving down further, we have items like coal, blood runes, adamant darts, law runes. Pretty much anything this and below is going to be golden for these types of flips. So let's just do the oak log because it's an easy item. All you need to do is determine the item's margin and do the R.O.I check. Like I said earlier, it's very important to do that with these items. Obviously, you can just get a hang for it and you don't really need to do an actual calculation every time, but it can kind of help when you're first learning. So it has a 1 GP margin, which gives us about a 3% R.O.I. And just go through a bunch of different items because you're not losing any money to determine the margin, and just find the best item at the time and then buy it for the lower price and sell it for the higher price is really simple, and it just takes some practice. Now, one thing before we move on, I would try to stray away from an item that just has a 1 GP margin. You can do this, but it leaves a lot less room for error, and the item may take a long time to come through because a lot of people could be doing these exact margins. It's pretty much impossible for there to be less than a 1 GP margin, so when there's only one, the degree of time it can take for the offer to complete can vary quite a lot. And also keep in mind, free-to-play items and pay-to-play items. Generally, pay-to-play items are going to be better because there's going to be less competition for those items. That's not to say to not do free-to-play items, but it's worth keeping in mind. Next up here in the high volume category is the slower flips for that. Now, there isn't as easy of a way to determine these items. You kind of just need to think of them a bit yourself. Now, if you have GE tracker, I usually come over here to the GE limits and then sort by the highest GE limit at the top. Now, these aren't sorted by the actual sell volume, so you can kind of quickly run down here and look for items that look promising. Now, the big benefit of slower high volume items is that the margins can be very large compared to regular high volume items, and if you have an extended period of time you don't mind leaving them in for, it can be extremely powerful. Like that giant seaweed flip I mentioned earlier, I got like 3 or 4 mil from that, and I did not invest much money at all. Just because I'm kind of curious, let's just have a look at the actual margin on giant seaweed right now. So it's 728 into 651. Like, that is a absolute massive margin for a high volume item. Now, if we go look at the giant seaweed either on GE tracker or just on the Grand Exchange database, we can have a look down here, and there's about 229,000 traded every day. So from here, I normally go over to the Oldschool Runescape wiki, and let's have a look at the buying limit right now. So 11,000. So we hop back over to the Grand Exchange. We're getting like 75 GP or something in profit here. We're just going to go ahead and put an offer in for 11,000. I'm just going to do this, and maybe by the time this video's out, I'll be able to complete this flip. It's a 7 mil flip, but we're potentially going to look at making like 800K in profit. So you can really see right there why these can be so powerful. Now, the amount of time you're going to need for flips like this can vary a lot, but generally you might need an entire day or something, but they're very low maintenance, and I like them because of that. Okay, moving on now to high margin items. Now to begin with here, we have the in-market high margin items. So that's going to be stuff like Barrows items, common PVM gear, and even some of the more expensive high margin items like the Arcane Spirit Shield, and raids rewards and stuff like that. So now we are getting into the territory where we need to start price checking things, but it's going to start costing you an actual substantial amount of money. And at this point, we want to be careful because we don't want to give away a bunch of our money just to check what the price is. That being said, for high margin items that are traded a lot, you probably just want to do a price check, because even with tools like GE Tracker or the Oldschool Runescape exchange, that information is going to go out of date very quickly. So the only way to get an accurate margin is going to be to price check it. So the two factors you want to keep in mind here now is the margin and the buying limit. The ROI is still important, but not nearly as important as it was with the high volume items. Now what's way more important is the amount of money you're getting back and the item buying limit, because that's generally going to be your limiting factor. So let's try the Duroc armor set right now. Now one thing I forgot to mention is if you have Rune Light, the buying limit will actually appear right in the client, and that's going to be extremely useful, along with the OS Buddy actively traded price, which can be a bit useful, but generally not too much. So what we're going to do is just do a regular price check, even though we are going to be losing a bit of money on this, unfortunately. We bought for 3,885,000. And we're going to sell it for 3,880K. So we didn't lose much money on there. But the good thing here is it's generally going to follow a certain ratio. If you lose a lot of money on the price check, you do have the potential to make a lot, because that is now the margin. Now this is not an amazing margin, so let's try something else. Okay, so we just price checked at Warrior's Ring for 107K into 112K, which is the same margin but for like 30 times cheaper. So let's go with this. So we know the buying limit is 8 because of this. Now this is where some people are a little divisive. I find on high margin items, you're better off undercutting a bit because the item prices are going to change so quickly and the limits are low, so it's not going to be that big a deal to undercut, but it really comes down to your personal preference. So from here, I would recommend doing at least 5 of that item. Ideally, you just want to do the entire buying limit, which is now 7 because you actually price checked an item, which means you're going to lose one of that buying limit. So we're going to do all 7 and just put in the offer for that. So generally, these type of flips are going to be extremely quick, while the amount traded per hour is actually less than the high volume items. The limit is so low on these items that they'll actually generally go through quicker. So I wouldn't really leave the Grand Exchange much if you're planning on doing these items, because it's going to come through very quickly. Okay, and last up here is high margin items that are extremely slow. Now these can be very powerful because you can actually leave your computer for days sometimes and still complete a flip. However, these are often the highest risk because it's very hard to determine what the margin is without price checking an item. Now, this is the only time where I would really highly recommend GE Tracker, because in these cases where the items are traded so infrequently, the prices tend to be very accurate. So for example, the Team Cape X, I would consider to be a high margin item that is slow. We can come down here on GE Tracker and go down to the day graph. It will show you a very close look at the different data points. So we can see right here that the last buy price is around 2,016K, and we can hopefully sell it for around 2.1 mil. So we can be fairly certain that is roughly where the margin is. Now, barring that, the best alternative is honestly to just guess. So we have the Team Cape X open here. It's an actively traded price on OS Buddy is 2,068K. Honestly, you could just guess and be like, okay, I'm gonna do 2,068K and just take off 30K or something. Do 2,030K and just hope the item comes through. If you're around and you know the price it came through at, you can maybe even stretch the margin further as you determine it slowly. And the last option, while not highly recommended, is just price checking the item. For an item like the Team Cape X, where at least it is traded a fair bit, it's probably not that high a risk. However, for extremely rare items that do not trade much, I would highly recommend not just price checking it. You're safer just guessing the item's price over price checking it, because you could stand to lose quite a bit of money because the margin can be so large and there's not enough volume for the item to recoup your loss quickly enough. So that is the 4 different ways I generally categorize flips. If I were to rank them in order of difficulty, or at least which ones you should try first when you are new to flipping, I would say in-market high volume flips are going to be the safest. I would say high volume flips that are slower would be the second safest. The third one would be high margin flips that are quick. And the fourth one would be slow high margin flips, that one being the riskiest and requiring the most knowledge. And if you want to rank them in order of speed, so which flip will be the quickest, you could rank them pretty much in the exact same way. Anyway guys, there was a lot more I wanted to talk about, but this video is stretching really long already. I'm probably going to split this into another video. Man, I really hope I can edit this down into something that makes sense because I feel like I've been rambling a lot. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it useful. Again, if you found it confusing, I would recommend going and watching my beginner guide. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.